you, Glenn. Hi, everybody. I am an alcoholic, and my name is Carol, and I am very grateful and honored to be here today. And thank you, Glenn, and everybody for your service and inviting me to the meeting to share. I come to this meeting almost every week. It's a great meeting. I love it. And you know what? I got to meet Glenn in person. I think it was September. I was on a trip in my camper van, and I got to meet several online friends and people I sponsor, and went to a district picnic that Glenn invited me to, and their speaker had a family emergency, and I ended up sharing my story at the district picnic. And it was fun because I had not done an in-person meeting or shared in person in a long time. I do it a lot online, but not in person. So it was a nice gift and special to me. So I was given a gift of sobriety on May 1st, 1988 in Fort Worth, Texas at the Glass House group. And I have not gone back out and tried again to drink since I came to my first meeting. I did all my quitting before I got to y'all. I haven't heard anybody in all the time that I've been sober say it's better out there, because if it was, you guys wouldn't be coming back. And I haven't had a drink a day at a time in 12,681 days. But once I had 6 days and 4 months and all those other times too. They told me there's a secret to getting long-time sobriety. And every time I heard somebody say that, I went up to them and I said, "What's the secret?" They said, "Stay close, keep coming to meetings and doing all you're supposed to do, and you'll find out." And I kept asking, and they kept saying, "Keep coming, you'll find out." And one day, somebody gave me the answer. He was a very nice man. He said, "If you don't drink and you don't die a day at a time, it adds up." And that's what I found. So I have a little over 34 years, 8 months, and 17 days sober, one at a time. And I will tell you, stuff happens whether I'm sober or not. And stuff happens in sobriety. But what I've learned is I have tools and ways to cope with life that I don't have to drink anymore. And I told myself, if you're new, these are some of the things that helped me a lot. And all the stuff I did when I was new is what I still do. It's getting in those habits early and keep doing them. I say drinking is not an option. It is poison. It's a can of Drano. It will kill me. So what are my options, right? Reading the big book and having a sponsor, which is just somebody to help me go through the steps and help me when I'm not sure about what direction to take. And I have to have a higher power. I've learned not to put my sponsors and people in my support group on pedestals, because that's what I was taught. And I was taught that no matter what, I can walk through it sober. I've heard people do it. I've heard people, when I was new and I couldn't imagine, we get these online meetings and I'm hearing people with 50 and 60 years sober. When I got sober, I think the most we heard was about 30 years back in 88. And they said sometimes life happens. And they said in their 20 years sober and their 30 years that life happened and it was hard sometimes. They had health issues and got divorces and retired and all kinds of stuff. And they said what it did is it made them work their program harder and stay closer to God. And that's what I found for me. And I love our book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm going to read you some. I always read from the beginning somewhere. When I share at the beginning, I like to read something. So today my book opened to the story called A Safe Haven on page 456 and 457. It says, "I have remained very active in the awesome program of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA has accomplished so many things in my life today. It has given me my sanity and an all-round sense of balance. Now willing to listen and take suggestions, I have found that the process of discovering who I really am begins with knowing who I really don't want to be. And although the disease of alcoholism inside of me is like gravity, just waiting to pull me down, AA and the 12 steps are like the power that causes an airplane to become airborne. It only works when the pilot is doing the right things to make it work. So, as I have worked the program, I have grown emotionally and intellectually. I not only have peace with God, I have the peace of God, Through an act of God consciousness, I have not only recovered from alcoholism, I have become whole in person, body, spirit, and soul. And it goes on, but I like that. See, when I came to you, I didn't like me. I felt dirty inside. I felt ashamed, and I've learned the words that I've read in the big book that describe me that I didn't know when I came to you: restless, irritable, and discontent. I always felt like that, from even when I was a little girl. I didn't start drinking till I was 18. I drank for 20 years. I got here at 37 and a half, and I'm 72 now. So I can learn new things. I just have to be willing. And I heard in my big book, it says that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. Well, yeah, it is, but so is recovery, and it's contagious. And I wanted what y'all had. When I started coming to meetings, you had what looked like peacefulness in your life, and you were laughing at things that I didn't think was funny, and you said, keep coming back and they will be funny. And they started to be. I remember years ago, I saw a cartoon, and it was Garfield the cat, and he was shackled spread eagle to a dungeon wall. And the caption said, someday I'm going to look back at this and laugh. Well, if I can look back at it and laugh, I might as well just laugh now. And see, God gave me this wonderful sponsor in my early sobriety. I was about 5 weeks sober, and I met her because somebody said a woman needs a meeting to her house. And so I got her number, and I went and visited her, and her name was Lois. She had a third of a lung. She was on oxygen, confined to bed the last 7 years of her life. She got sober in June 1966. She was 22 years sober. And she taught me the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and told me about a higher power I had to find. And we went on this journey together. And what it also taught me is how to stay sober without being in physical in-person meetings all the time, because she didn't go to them for the last 7 years of her life. She died when I had a year sober, right before she had 23 years sober. Now, what I'm going to tell you is, I always said I can go 2 weeks without a drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem because they drink all day, all the time. That's not me. They told me to read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous and see if I can find myself in the book, and I did. In lots of places. The guy with the whiskey and the milk. It's going to be different this time. I'm going to try something different. I'm not going to drink that again. Whatever it was. I don't like beer. I never drank beer. That can't be it. You have to be able to drink beer to be an alcoholic, right? No, I could have beer in my refrigerator and not touch it, but that's not it. It's what happens when I put the alcohol in my body. I have no control over what I'm going to drink or how much. If I opened a bottle of wine, I didn't buy a single bottle usually. I bought the big bottles. How much am I going to drink out of it? I have no control over what. Maybe a couple glasses, maybe the whole thing. I don't know. I drove drunk. I drove in blackouts, but thankfully I didn't get a DUI and go to jail. I showed up for work every day. But my big book, the story, it might have been worse. It said I didn't have to lose jobs and go to jail or any of that stuff. It said it's not how far I'd gone, but where it's headed. And then one of the other stories, it said I felt too horrible on the inside to be pretty on the outside. Another story said when I was drinking, I was withdrawing from life little by little, and now I have to get in the social life of the world. See, my drinking took me from being partying out at bars and honky-tonks to being at home drinking by myself. I didn't want to drive drunk and kill anybody. So I went to work, and then I would come home, and I did have a boyfriend, and he drank like me. But when I had 2 weeks without that drink, I wanted to drink really bad. Those feelings hit, right? The shame and all that stuff that happened when I was a kid that shouldn't have, and things I did when I was drinking, and things that happened, and just life, not even things that happened, just not feeling comfortable in my skin and not knowing how to cope with life. As the oldest of 3 kids, I had a lot of responsibility. I took care of the brother and the sister in the house and cooked the meals and all that from when I was like 10. And I was working in New York City full time by the time I was 18. And I think what that did is it kept me out of a lot of trouble too, because I didn't go to college. I didn't have that experience. But I'm grateful for everything that happened because it took what it took. When somebody planted that seed in my early 20s about maybe I need Alcoholics Anonymous, I said no. But what happened is my God, what I call God, my higher power, God knew at one point I would make it to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I had a lot of experiences happen so that I could share them with you that made me feel worse. So I get into Alcoholics Anonymous. Somebody greets me at the door at the glass house, gives me a big hug, says, "Welcome, we love you. Why don't you go make coffee?" I don't drink coffee. I don't know how to make it. I still don't drink coffee. I might be one of the rare AAs that don't drink coffee. But they said on the walls instructions, and if I follow them, I can make coffee. And they told me to set up chairs. And I did whatever they told me. Because you know what they did? They trick you. They tricked me. They said, for every pot of coffee you make, Carol, and every chair you set up, Carol, you'll get a day of sobriety. And I believed it. I think that's how I got my first year. And so if you think somebody's at home and could use a meeting, share with them, because they might change your life like she changed my life. It really did. I'd be a whole different person. I didn't know how to sit still, and I didn't know how to be at peace with myself. And so when I had that 2 weeks, like I told you, I was going to go drink. I was in so much emotional pain. It felt like somebody was ripping my guts out. The pain was so intense. And it was like, Carol, how could you think so little of yourself to let those people do that to you and to do that to yourself? And I went back. I was walking out the door, and this man stopped me. His name was John, and he told me not to go back out. It's not better. He told me I might not make it back because we don't all make it back, and it might be years if I did make it back. It's not always a revolving door, I've learned. I've watched people go out and don't make it back, or it might take years. So I went back in that meeting like he suggested, and the ladies, we sat and we talked and we cried. We kind of did what we call a fifth step on that issue that was causing me so much pain that I wanted to drink to not feel it. And those ladies told me that stuff we're sharing now is what they walk through sober too. And they told me that someday, it's that part in my big book that says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, the deepest, darkest secrets of my past are my greatest possession. Because I could avert death and misery for others like they were doing that for me. They told me I can go back out and drink, maybe make it back, and maybe more stuff would happen. Maybe I'd drive drunk and kill somebody or go to jail. I don't know. But I walked out of that meeting and I didn't hurt as bad anymore. I didn't feel like I needed to drink anymore. They told me I'm not a bad person trying to get good. I'm a sick person trying to get well. And I kept going to meetings, and guess what? I got my 30-day chip. Wow, that was cool, right? You know what happened in my 30 days? I got that chip. Before the meeting, this lady said, would you read how it works? And I said, no, because I might stumble over words and then I'll be embarrassed, right? Because I am so sensitive and self-conscious and all that. But that changed my life that day. Because when you walk into the glass house and other groups, and we read it at meetings a lot, we have the responsibility statement, right? It says, I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. For that, I'm responsible. Just like that man that stopped me from going back out, and those ladies that sat with me when I wanted to drink. And I made a decision that day to never say no to an AA request. Because what came to my mind sitting there, instead of feeling proud for 30 days, I was really hard on myself. Because what came to mind is, what if everybody said no? There wouldn't have been a meeting for me to be sitting in at that moment. You know? And this man came up after and he congratulated me on 30 days. And I said, but I didn't read how it works. I have no idea what anybody shared at that meeting because I was so focused on the shame of, for not reading it. I learned the guilt is worse than the fear because we never make fun of each other. And then what this man said is, when's the last time you had 30 days in a row sober since you started drinking? And I didn't have any. And it started my journey. And then at 5 weeks sober, they said, there's a woman who needs a meeting to her house. And I went and met Lois. Now, Lois was an amazing lady. She had the serenity and peacefulness. And just imagine, she was already confined to bed for 6 years. I don't do well when I have surgery and they tell me to sit in the hospital for 4 days. I was ready to check out in August when I had to be there. But Lois taught me the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she kept it simple. And we did it like the big book, and we went through it quickly because that's what they did back in the early days. They get through it quickly. They didn't say, wait till you feel like it and wait a year. The book doesn't say that. My book says at once, next, when you've done this, the next thing is. And so we sat on her bed. I sat on her bed with her. And she said, Carol, if you weren't drinking, would you have done the things you did and put yourself in the situations? Carol, if you need a drink to be social, you're not a social drinker. And people that aren't alcoholic don't wonder if they are. And it's better to be an Alcoholics Anonymous by mistake than out there by mistake. That was my first couple steps. We talked about some of the stuff that happened and all that too. But we did them in the first 2 days. Then it's the third step. My big book says the third step's vital and crucial, and I had to find a higher power. Now, I had a problem with that one. And Glass House is a church annex. They called the Glass House the God Squad, and they called it the Glass House because we should live as if we live in a glass house. My insides and outsides need to match. See, I used to match my insides to your outsides, and I'd come up short. I remember once I was going to go to a meeting because something was happening, and I was all grungy. I think I was mowing the lawn or something, and I didn't go, and I told somebody. A few days later, I told me, I said, I really needed a meeting, and I didn't go because I was all dirty and stuff. And somebody said, do you think that might have made you more approachable? And it made me think. See, because all the people that are all put together all the time, I think they wouldn't want to talk to me for the way I felt when I was new. But when I matched my insides to your insides, we're the same. So that's what I have to remember. And she told me I had to find a higher power, and I could borrow hers till I found one that I could have of my own. That I could have a higher power. I could call it God or whatever I want to call it. Creator, Great Spirit, Great Mystery. It's a mystery how God works sometimes. I don't know. So I have my own higher power. And I would say, God, let me know you how you want me to know you, and please show me that you are here, that you're working in my life. I got to see it. Some of it is hindsight, like that guy that stopped me from going out, John. That was God showing me that God's there before I even believed in a God. That God got me to the Glass House, which is a perfect place for me, because I heard step studies, concepts, traditions, steps, recovery. We were immersed in it every day. And that's what I did. I have a very simple program. So I read something once and it said, God, how do I know you and where can I find you? And it said, I'm as close as your closest breath and farther than the farthermost star. And Lois had a poem called I Am There that the Apollo 15 astronauts put on the moon. You can do a search and find it. And it's a generic God. It's like, even if you didn't believe me or know I'm there, I was there. I like that kind of a God. Now, my God that I found, I've tried different things. I've tried some of what you share. I've listened to you. I've read my big book. My book says something to the effect, God's everything or nothing. What do I want that God to be? So I want God to be everything. I don't want God to be nothing. I don't have a hateful, punishing God like I thought I had when I came to you. I have this higher power that gives me pop quizzes sometimes. Carol, what do you know and how are you applying it here? Right? Okay, let's give you something new to try. See, there's yets that happened. I didn't have the yets of the DUI and go to jail, but I've had yets happen sober, like my parents got sick and it was a slow death for both of them that I got to be there. I've had cancer in my own footprint story, right? I've had my husband die a long time ago. I went through that sober. I get to travel in my camper van and have amazing experiences and God stories. And change isn't always easy. I'm going through some changes again now, and I'm praying, like, God, show me how you want me to do this. Show me what I'm supposed to do. Now, Lois was very big on prayers. That was part of our step 3. She said, and she gave me a lot of prayers. She would laugh at me a lot, too. When I tell her stuff, she'd laugh. And then she would say, stand up, Carol, take 2 steps and say, thank you, God. I can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time. She couldn't do it. I didn't get to stay in self-pity. I'd call her something and she'd say, do you have dishes in the sink? Go wash them, vacuum the floor, dust your furniture. And I go, but I have problems. She goes, give them to God for a few days and pray about it and take other action. She said, I don't think my way into right acting. I change my actions and my thinking changes. And so I got prayers to use. Like one of them, I'll share some of the prayers with you because they still work and you can borrow them, share them. One of them was, Carol, ask God, if it be God's will, can you please not do things to hurt yourself anymore? God, if it be your will, can I see these people or situations as you do? God, I'm going to do this for you so I can't get resentful. Every time I pick up the phone, I had to say, okay, God, let this call go the way you want it to. I could put notes. I had notes on my phone. We had phones back then. We didn't have cell phones. We had real telephones. They had push buttons and dials, and you could actually tape a note to it. And so that's what I did. One of my notes, there's one on my fridge now, and it's a different note, but it says the same thing. And it was, Dear Carol, I know what I'm doing. Love God. That's all I need to know. I'm not in charge. Let God or be God, they told me. And so my higher power is gender neutral, not masculine and feminine. My God sees the future and gives me experiences to grow through because God knows that somebody is going to be in my life one day. And I'm going to share with them what I went through to help them survive like those women did with me. I like to tell you that it's not the storm that gets me, it's the forecast. This might happen, right? And I try to not get into the what ifs. I just say, okay, God, I have that pop quiz. What are we going to do here? I've learned them as sick as my secrets. If I don't tell you stuff, they're going to take root, not always in a good way. So I've learned that. At 31 and a half years sober, I will tell you, at 31 and a half years sober, I like to cook and bake. I'm making dough right now for bread. And I have to leave it alone for an hour and a half, right? Can't mess with it or it messes it up. Just like I have to let God work in whatever it is without messing it up. And at 31 and a half years sober, somebody gave me vanilla beans. And when I go to Texas, I help my friends in their bakery, and they're not alcoholic. They take a bottle of vodka, a big bottle of vodka, and they split vanilla beans, stick it in the vodka, shake it up, and in a few months, they have vanilla extract. Now, one of my friends doesn't know that story. She gave me vanilla beans for the holidays a couple of years ago. And do you know what my first thought was? I told you, 31 and a half years sober. First thought, Carol, go buy vodka and make vanilla extract with these vanilla beans. I didn't tell anybody. I thought that is a good idea, Carol. Instead of the little bottles that you buy vanilla with water instead of alcohol, you can go make alcohol, vanilla bean extract. You won't drink the bottle of vodka. It has vanilla beans in it, right? Do you know what happened? I go to Costco, it's a big store, and I end up going in the liquor section to check out how much vodka is. I'm trying to rationalize and justify this is a good idea. And I realize this is going on for a week or two, and it's getting more strong, and this is not good when I go into the liquor section. And I end up telling my sponsor and sharing it at my group, and we laugh. We go, yeah, that isn't a good idea, Carol. And I never thought about it again except to tell it to you in a story. See, that's what happens. If I didn't share it, probably would have bought it. Ended up drinking it maybe, because I've heard a lot of people without any thought or effort, they'll drink. So I have to stay on guard. But you know what? I go through life and I don't think about drinking or not drinking. Those promises in my big book have come true. That fourth step, I did my fourth step. I did the third step. My higher power sees the future. My higher power gives me things to grow through. I've learned where God guides, God provides. I have a picture behind me I took when I was up in a helicopter. I think it's Palm Beach, Florida. And you can't even see, people are so small you can't see them, and houses are specks. See, my God sees from a higher perspective. My God says, you know, it's like that third step after the ABCs and how it works. It says, I being convinced, I am like the actor, and I want to set the stage and the play and the scenery. And if things go my way, this is how I act. And if they don't go my way, that's how I would act. Try not to act the way that other way. But my God has a script, and God gets me up in the morning. I say, thank you, God, for another day. What's up today, God? And I do the prayer. Okay, I'm giving you my will today, God. I'm giving you, made a decision to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to the best of my ability and give it to you. Let's see what happens today. Some days I say, God, this is what I would like to do today, like make the bread and do that. And sometimes God says, okay, Carol. And sometimes God will say, no, I'm going to change it. Like, why did God change who speaks today? I don't know. There's a reason. I might not ever know. But I thought it was interesting reading that story. It talked about a pilot, right? I don't know what God's plan is. I suit up and I show up and I say, okay. Now, once I did that third step, and God keeps showing me how big God is, I get lots of God stories. I did the fourth step. And Lois said it's her favorite, because if I don't know why I'm the way I am, I don't know what to change and fix. So I did my fourth step. I was probably 6 weeks sober, kept trying to avoid it, you know, and go to different groups, because my group was going to do the fourth step that day. And the other group I went to, guess what step they did? Fourth step. So I did it, and then I did that fifth step, but I thought I'll never tell some things. And then I'd hear you share from the podium. And I shared my hardest stuff first, she said, to get it out. And I did. And she loved me still. And she said, yeah, I did that too. And I've heard some of you do some of my stuff that I thought I'd keep a secret forever. And then when I got that fifth step done, man, I didn't have a knot in my gut. I had no more secrets. The fact that some of you trusted me to do a fifth step with me, and I got the honor to do it with people, what a blessing. What a blessing that we get to have freedom and help each other to escape those torments of life that colored my world for so long. And then I get to 6 and 7, and I get lots of chances every day. God gives me lots of chances to work on 6 and 7 every day. And I don't know what God's going to change or have happen. Right now I'm going through a lot of change. I'm going through, do I move or do I not move? I have lots of options, and I don't know which one. And you know, it's really funny. Years ago, I was going through change, and I read something in my daily meditation. It said, changes are gifts. Really, it means I'm progressing on course. And then people send me these little inspirational posters and flyers, and one of them today was something like, what if your new adventure is better than you could have imagined? See, that's what I get to have here. Now I'm going to share a few things with you. You know, I did that fifth step. I sat after and reviewed stuff, and for weeks after, Lois would say, did you forget anything in your fifth step? Because what I've learned is sometimes God reveals things slower, like onions, layer by layer by layer. Sometimes God reveals something like an ear of corn right down to my husk where it's painful, and I get to reveal it, see it painfully. I don't ever know. I still get awarenesses and awakenings here, and people share, and I go, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, that happened too. I don't remember. I just remembered that, and it's like years ago. And I read my big book, and I get to see things different because I have a magical big book. And I made amends, had to make amends. Some of them were just amends to me, be nice to people, not be so hard on myself. You know, Somebody said something once, and I told Lois, and she said, Carol, would you let somebody come dump a bucket of garbage in your living room? And I said, well, no. And she goes, why would you let them dump it in your mind? I'm like, oh, right. Can't do that. I'm not flypaper or sticky stuff anymore. Stuff doesn't have to stick to me. She said, I can go to the mirror, say, this is what they said about me. Is it true or not? If it's not true, let it go. If it is true, do I like that about me, or do I want to change that? Because I've learned there's stuff about me I like, but mostly my family, they didn't like me changing, right? I didn't react to them the same way. I learned I don't have to anymore. I don't let people hurt me either anymore. And I did financial amends. I would consolidate debt at the bank and pay off my credit cards. I had not loans. I had money. I stole candy bars. I hated hearing I was a thief, but I was a thief. I didn't always pay for candy bars at the little gas station across the street. And back then, candy was a nickel and a penny, right? How do I make an amend for that? It was so long ago, and it bothered me so much that I took some revenue from that man that probably wasn't making much money, and he was so nice, and I'm sure he knew we were doing that, and he never said anything. And then I heard somebody, and she said she had some things she couldn't repay the way she needed to, and so she and her sponsor figured out, let's figure out how much it would be in current value, add interest, donate it anonymously, and don't take a tax deduction. And I asked Lois, and she said, yeah, that would work. And so I did that. I had another amend that would hurt somebody else, and I did it the same way. And I got to just be different, because it says in my big book that actions will speak louder than words. It says the world's judging me by my actions, and I'm judging me by my intentions. And most of the time they match now. Not always, but they're closer than they used to be. Now, I had a formula I had to do every morning and every night. And I had assignments. I had to read the book from cover to cover. Sometimes I could read a page or a chapter. It didn't matter. What I found over time is I read my big book out loud in the singular. It makes more sense to me. It slows my mind down. I remember what I read. Now, I don't know about you, but if I read silently, my mind wanders and I don't remember a thing I read. Doesn't matter if it's a paragraph or a page or a novel or my big book. I can read it and not remember it. But if I read it out loud, it sticks in my brain. Like how it works. When we read it out loud, those things stick in my brain. I remember hearing, I stood at a turning point. I asked for an intuitive thought or decision. The result was no until I let go absolutely. Whatever those are, they just kind of wander into my mind at times. So I read my big book out loud in the singular. And I had to read something every day, just start cover to cover. But in addition to that, Lois gave me certain things to read. And I still do this, and it's what I share with people that I sponsor when I share with you, because it still works. And it was read the 3rd and 7th step prayer and do it in the morning and at night, and sometime during the day. Keep remembering to make conscious contact with that higher power all day too. And then I had to read the 3rd and 7th step prayers. And then I had to do 68 to 71. And Lois said, ask God to help me set my ideals and live up to them. She said, Carol, if you know what your ideals are, you know how you want to live. When I have to make decisions, are they in accordance with my ideals and how I want to live or not? If they're not, I probably don't need to be doing them. Right? Dr. Bob says it's thoughtful and selfishness, was it kindliness and selfishness, tolerance and love, I think he said. And it measures up to those 4. And then she had me read 84 to 88, which is steps 11, 10, and 11. And then I had to write, and I did my writing at night. I wrote a gratitude list, things I did to help my self-esteem list for that day, and a journal. And I had to call 3 to 5 women every day and write to GSO. I wrote to GSO to be of service. And so I wrote to women in prison, and I wrote to people around the world through Loners International, which is like an AA pen pal club, because there's people that don't have meetings. It was different back then. Maybe they have some now, but there's still people in remote parts, and we work the steps by letter. We share our experience by letter. So I did all that stuff, and I stay sober, and I have a solid foundation, and my roots are deep into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love the online meetings. I would never have met any of you, and I wouldn't have had experiences I've had. And I love it. And it's re-energized my program a lot. And my program is simple. Okay, God, I'm giving this to you. Let's see what you do with it. Because I have so many experiences that shows me God's there no matter what. They're not all fun ones. You know, I shared sometimes, like, I got through my parents dying slowly, and I didn't drink. But you know how I did that? I kept watching for God to show up. And God kept showing me, okay, God, show me you're here. And I get to work my program, because my dad was really frustrated, and he was in the hospital, and he had no power to do anything. And you know what? It was in March. It was St. Patrick's Day. I went down to the cafeteria to get something to eat. And there was a nurse behind me. It was a male nurse, never saw him before. We were talking, and a couple of weeks go by, and I get a phone call at work. My dad, if you want to see your dad alive, come now. And I did. I went after work, but this was during work hours. And guess who the nurse was on my dad's floor in my dad's room when I got there that day? The guy that was in the cafeteria on St. Patrick's Day that I never saw before in the whole 5 weeks my dad was in the hospital. And God showed me that God's there. At 4 years sober, I got cancer. At a year sober, I went and had foot surgery, and Lois died, and I get more God stories, right? 4 years sober, I got cancer, and God gave me a footprint story. From what doctor I used till I got to the hospital, through the whole process, and it's still unfolding today. Where God guides, God provides. You know, I had cancer again. I've had it a few times. I've had a lot of surgery. But when I was 4 years sober and I'm on the stretcher outside the operating room, I'm talking to the anesthesiologist, and I said, "You sound very familiar." He took his mask and his cap off, and he leaned down and he said, "Glass House." Because I told him I'm having surgery and I was scared. Well, evidently he was either at that meeting or somebody told him, and happened to be at the hospital he was the anesthesiologist at, right? And he leaned down, he said, "Glass House." And I said, "Can we invite God into the operating room, please?" And he said, "Yes." And we're holding hands saying the Serenity Prayer, inviting God into the operating room. A doctor walks by and he sees us doing this. He says, "Do you two know each other?" Jim said, "Yes, we're both sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous." Now, God gave me a different outcome than my doctor. My doctor says, "We're giving you a 99 to 1% outcome of a reversible surgery." I had to have my intestines removed and some other body parts. And guess what? God says, "Carol, we're giving you the 1% outcome." Right? Now, because of that, I had a lot of experiences. I've even shared it like I'm sharing it now. I have a permanent ileostomy with a bag on the outside of my body. And even a couple of weeks ago, this lady said, "I have one too. Nobody talks about it." Now, what I will tell you is I learned the difference between theory and experience. And I also learned to trust God, because if God says, "Carol, I am going to put you back the way you were," but you and everybody else who's been affected or touched by it, you all lose your lessons and experiences. And I would say, "No, thank you, God." Except once in a while on a off day if my skin's really irritated or something. But what happened is I had a nurse in the hospital, and this nurse had the book learning. Wasn't working. And I told my doctor, and my doctor says, "Go to this other hospital. This nurse has one for 20 years, and I'll bet she could help you." And I went and talked to that nurse, and guess what? It made all the difference. See, she had the experience. Why Alcoholics Anonymous works is I'm not talking theory. You don't give me theory. We get the big book with experience, and we share our experiences with each other. You don't say, why did you do that again? You say, yeah, me too. I know how you feel. If I've had an experience and I tell you what it is, if you've had it, I don't have to put it into words. And if you haven't, I can't put it into words. I've walked through a lot of stuff sober. Right? 2010, I had 4 more surgeries. They weren't good. The outcome was worse. I've lived with chronic pain and health issues, and I grow tumors in my body, and I've got several, and I'm missing a lot of body parts. But what God says is, Carol, get up every day. I have a plan for you. You suit up and show up, Carol, just like you were taught. I want to tell you, I woke up this morning and I hurt really bad inside from all my surgeries, and I didn't want to get out of bed. But what I learned is God says, Carol, that's our time together. That's our meditation time. And I laid there and I did all those things that I do. I read them enough I could do them in my head. And I do them and I say, okay, God. And I get up and the phone rings and I'm on the phone. And then I make my bread dough. And then I come into this meeting because I love it. And Glenn says, will you share? And I said, yes. And I feel so much better. And God keeps saying, suit up and show up, Carol. I've got a plan for you. I don't know what it is. Sometimes God waits to the last minute, I've learned. You know, right now I'm trying to figure out, do I want to move or stay here, or what do I want to do? And I have lots of options. I was just on a 2.5 months in my camper van, and I love it. I love traveling and volunteering and doing stuff, and I can go do that again. And, you know, I get these God stories. And God keeps showing me that God is there, how big God is, right? And I have to just remember where God guides, God provides. And I take different actions. I don't do old stuff. Old behavior is not comfortable anymore. New behavior, new actions are what I know works. You know, when I had a year sober, I got my 1-year chip, my 1-year medallion. They're not chips, I was told. They're medallions. And the next guy got a 2-year medallion. And he said he thought his first year was the hardest, but the second was. And I go, I don't want to go into 2. 1 was hard. I did a lot of work. We did my first steps in like months, right? Months, not years, months. First few months. Got them done. Finished my amends. I think I was 5 months sober finishing the last of them, but I was doing all the other stuff from days, you know, from when I met Lois, weeks sober, all those steps. I was doing them. And the next guy said, it's only as hard as you let it be. That's what I tell myself. It's only as hard as I let it be. All right, God, let's see what you're going to do with this one. And I keep getting God's stories, right? Like on that trip I was just on. Or on other trips, I always get a God story. Every time something mechanical happens. And I go, okay, God, what are we going to do this time? And I remember sitting in Glenn's backyard, and we were talking, and he goes, see those mountains way in the distance? I said, yeah. He goes, those are the Smoky Mountains that you drove over to get here. Now, driving over the Smoky Mountains in my camper van was not always fun. It was some really steep hills. And my engine did not want to go very much over 40. And then sometimes I was riding down and I was having to ride the brakes. And sometimes they were wide curves, right? Sometimes they were a little steep. And that's journeys through sobriety. You know, if I had to draw peaks and valleys, like standing at the front of the 4-step or whatever, there'd be it'd be like real sharp peaks and valleys. And when I look back, they're just little ripples. And I'm so grateful to walk this journey, you know. And every time something happens, you know. I remember in 2017, I was in Mississippi on a north-south road, and there was nothing for an hour, and this voice said, stop for gas. There was no other town except the one I'm in. I thought, I don't need gas. But I've learned to listen to that voice. And you know what happened? When I went to go, my camper, the transmission just quit, no warning. And I had to get towed the wrong way a half hour. and I get towed to a mechanic. He said it's going to take a week to get a transmission, but you can plug into my building and have electricity. And then across the street is a pizza shop, a beauty parlor, and a grocery store. See, where God guides, God provides. When I was just in South Carolina, I got there Friday, and Saturday I went outside and I smelled gasoline. And I know from an experience from 2017 what it could be. My fuel line was leaking to my generator. And I looked underneath and I go, sure enough, that's what it's doing. And I found another camper at another site, and he goes, yeah, that's what it is. But I know somebody who has a mobile RV guy. He went, we got another number. I called this mobile RV guy. He came and fixed it, and I had the parts from when it happened before. And I didn't have to drive anywhere unsafe. God keeps showing me. I just have to trust. And so I am so grateful to have a new way to live. That no matter what, I don't have to drink. I don't think about it. And when people call and they tell me this stuff happening in their life, and I go, but did you think about drinking through this? He said, no. See, that's the miracle I don't want to miss. That no matter what, I'm not thinking about drinking or not drinking. It's just life. And I'm going to share one more thing, because this helped me a lot. We had a lot of stories. But they told me to clasp my hands. So everybody clasp your hands. And they said, Carol, what thumb's in the front? And I said, my right one. And they said, switch it so the left thumb's in the front. And they said, how does that feel? And I said, it feels uncomfortable. It's not right. It doesn't feel good. And they said, that's new actions and behaviors in Alcoholics Anonymous. Every time I clasp my hands, if my right thumb's in the front, switch it to my left. And one day it's going to be automatic and comfortable. And new behaviors become automatic and comfortable, and old behavior isn't anymore. I'm so grateful to be here and be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous with roots deep into the program. So I don't think about drinking, but I still stay active, and I love it. And we're never going to outgrow this program. That's part of a promise in my big book. Thank you, Glenn, for asking me to share. I hope I shared something that helps you. And if your higher power can't do miraculous things, you can borrow mine. Thank you again.
Wow. Thank